So, imagine you're training for a marathon, right? And you do this for 33 years.
Wow. That's a long training block.
Yeah, right? You dedicate every waking moment to this one goal. And against all odds, you actually manage to shave 3 full hours off your personal best time.
Which is an absolute triumph, physically speaking.
Exactly. It's undeniable. But then, you cross the finish line, you're totally exhausted, and you check the global leaderboard.
And your rank barely moved.
Your rank barely moved. It's wild.
Yeah.
And that's exactly the paradox we're looking at today, because between 1990 and 2023, China's human development score just exploded by over 60%.
Yeah, over 62% to be precise. It's staggering.
Right, 62%. We're literally talking about the complete rewiring of a society of over 1 billion people. But on the global stage, they only moved up 32 spots.
Which really messes with your head when you first see the numbers.
It does. So today, we're diving into the data to figure out why. Welcome to the deep dive, by the way. We've got this massive stack of United Nations Human Development Index data in front of us.
The HDI, yeah. Specifically looking at China over this sweeping 33-year period.
And our mission for you today is to look right past those standard macroeconomic headlines. We always hear about the economic miracle and GDP growth.
Right, but GDP doesn't tell you what it's like to actually live there.
Exactly. We want to unpack the human experience. What does a society-wide transformation look like for you, the individual, in terms of your health, your wealth, your education?
And, crucially, the hidden environmental and social costs that pay for it all.
Yes, the costs. So let's start with this ranking paradox. It really is jarring when you put the numbers side by side.
It is. To really grasp the scale of this, for you listening, picture like a pure white background. And on the left side, this massive question just appears.
The 62.3% surge versus the 32 spots.
Right. Why did they only go up 32 spots?
Yeah.
So in 1990, China's HDI was 0.491.
Which means what exactly in UN terms?
Well, contextually, that placed them 112th globally. So they were firmly rooted in the low human development category.
Okay, 112. Got it.
But then you fast forward to 2023, and that number rocketed to 0.797.
Wow.
Yeah, and that score puts them at rank 80 in the world.
See, that just feels totally counterintuitive to me. I mean, if your overall score goes up by more than 60%, you'd expect to just rocket to the very top of the leaderboard.
You'd think so, yeah.
Is this like an actual full-scale catch-up we're looking at? Or is it just some quirk in how the UN calculates these rankings? It feels like an illusion.
No, it's absolutely not an illusion. It's actually a reflection of a broader global reality.
Because everyone else was moving too.
Exactly. The ranking shift seems modest because the rest of the world, well, they weren't just standing still for 3 decades. Global development averages rose everywhere over that same time frame.
Okay, so the trek itself got faster.
Right. But the absolute growth, that jump from 0.491 to 0.797, that is what we really need to focus on today.
Because that's the lived experience part.
Yes. That delta represents a ground-up reconstruction of a nation's foundational systems.
So what does that trend line actually look like?
If we trace the total HDI leap from 1990 to 2023, you see this incredibly stable, just relentless upward curve.
Like no major dips.
Virtually no stagnation. They crossed the threshold into medium human development right around the year 2000, hitting a score of roughly 0.598.
Okay, so that's the first decade.
Then by 2010, they pushed past 0.710, which means they entered the high human development phase.
Wow, so moving up a whole tier every decade.
Basically. And as of 2023, sitting at 0.797, they were knocking right on the door of the very high tier, which begins at 0.800.
Just a microscopic fraction of a point away.
Very close, yeah.
But, we have to remember, for you listening, this HDI number isn't just some magic digit. It's a composite metric, right?
Exactly. It averages 3 distinct engines of human progress.
Health, knowledge, and income.
Right. And you can't reach 0.797 on just one engine. They all have to be firing simultaneously.
Which is the hardest part. So let's look at the first engine. Because health is arguably the prerequisite for everything else. You can't learn or earn if you aren't healthy.
Very true. And the core metric the UN uses for the health engine is life expectancy at birth.
Okay, so where did they start in 1990?
In 1990, the data shows life expectancy in China was 68.1 years.
68.1.
All right. But by 2022, it peaked at 78.2 years before settling slightly to 77.95 years in 2023.
Wait, adding nearly a full decade of life expectancy to a population of over 1 billion people?
Yes. A full decade.
How does a society even functionally execute that? I mean, we're talking about billions of collective human years added to the demographic ledger.
It's an astronomical logistical achievement.
Right, because you don't get that just by telling people to, eat better or jog more. What is the actual mechanism behind a 10-year jump on that scale?
You get it through a massive logistical overhaul of the public health infrastructure. And it happens in distinct phases.
Like stepping stones.
Exactly. So in the 1990s, when life expectancy was sitting around 68, the primary drivers of mortality were infectious diseases, waterborne illnesses.
Things that are relatively cheap to fix if you have the logistics, right?
Correct. And relatively high infant and maternal mortality rates. So the mechanism for extending life expectancy at that initial stage is all about basic infrastructure.
Like clean water.
Rolling out clean water infrastructure to thousands of remote rural villages, establishing localized primary care clinics, implementing mass vaccination programs.
Because saving infants massively skews the average up.
Exactly. When you reduce infant mortality, the statistical average for life expectancy naturally surges. The financial cost of saving a life at that developmental stage is, well, it's relatively low.
But the logistics are a nightmare.
The logistical effort required to coordinate it across such a vast geography is monumental.
Okay, so that initial jump from 68 to, say, 74 is heavily weighted toward basic sanitation and early childhood survival.
Right.
But getting from 74 up to almost 78, that requires a completely different medical approach, doesn't it?
A totally different universe of medicine, yes.
Because the infrastructure that fixes waterborne illness isn't the same infrastructure that pushes life expectancy toward 80.
That is the crux of what we call the epidemiological transition. You are shifting from treating acute infectious conditions to managing chronic age-related diseases.
So cancer, heart disease.
Exactly. Oncology, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, cognitive decline. By the time the nation is pushing a national average of 78 years, the infrastructure has to completely transform.
From little rural clinics to what?
To massive urban research hospitals equipped with MRI machines, specialized surgical teams, and long-term care facilities.
Which is not cheap.
Not at all. The cost of adding a single year of life at age 75 is astronomically higher than saving an infant from a preventable infection.
Yeah.
The system has to become vastly more complex and vastly more expensive.
Which actually brings up an interesting anomaly in the data you mentioned. You said the peak was 78.2 in 2022, right?
Yes, 78.2.
But then it dipped to 77.95 in 2023. Why the pullback? Is that just like a statistical blip, or does it signal a deeper structural issue?
What's fascinating here is that this slight retraction reveals the subtle frictions of a post-pandemic reality. But it also points to the immense looming challenges of a rapidly aging population.
Because keeping older people healthy is harder.
Precisely. When you extend life expectancy by 10 years, you fundamentally change the demographic shape of your country. You shift the disease burden.
Right.
The health engine has to change its overarching philosophy from saving lives to maintaining longevity.
Which is a subtle but massive difference.
And that slight dip suggests that the friction of managing a massive population of elderly citizens, compounded by the strain on the healthcare system following global health crises, it's beginning to test the limits of the current infrastructure.
It's like they're a victim of their own success. You keep people alive longer, and suddenly you have hundreds of millions of people requiring complex, continuous medical care.
It's a very expensive success.
But as we said, health is just the baseline. It's the physical prerequisite for the second engine of the HDI, which is knowledge.
Right, education.
Because you can't build a modern economy if your workforce isn't educated.
And the knowledge expansion data in this UN report is deeply revealing. It functions almost like a demographic time capsule.
How so?
Well, we look at two primary metrics here: expected years of schooling, or EYS, and mean years of schooling, or MYS.
Okay, break those down for us. What's the difference?
Expected years of schooling represents the future. It's how many years of education a child entering the school system today can statistically expect to receive based on current enrollment rates.
Got it. And mean years?
Mean years of schooling represents the present reality. It's the actual average years of education currently held by the adult population aged 25 and older.
The contrast between those two metrics in the data is just staggering.
It really is.
Because in 1990, the expected years of schooling was 8.6 years, so basically middle school.
Barely middle school, yeah.
But by 2023, that number had nearly doubled to 15.47 years.
Which is a massive leap.
Right. That means a kid starting primary school today is on track to receive some form of higher education, likely pushing right into university.
Yeah.
But then you look at the MYS, the actual current average for adults. In 1990, it was just 4.14 years.
So basic primary education.
And by 2023, it grew to 8.03 years.
This raises an important question regarding the pace of societal change. Why does the expected schooling metric grow so much faster than the mean schooling metric?
Because of the older generations, right?
Exactly. It's the generational lag inherent in demographics. The MYS, that average of 8.03 years, is weighed down by the older generations in the population.
People who grew up in the 50s, 60s, and 70s.
Right. During periods when widespread access to formal education infrastructure was severely limited or even entirely disrupted.
Okay.
The EYS of 15.47 years, however, represents the youth and the modern, heavily funded educational apparatus.
Let's really dig into what this generational lag looks like on the ground for you listening, because an MYS of 8.03 means the average adult right now essentially has a middle school education.
Statistically, yes.
But the expected years for a kid starting today is 15 and a half years. Think about the sociological whiplash happening inside a single household.
It's a fascinating dynamic.
You have a child statistically guaranteed to receive almost double the education of their grandparents. You could have grandparents who maybe finished fourth grade sitting across the dinner table from a grandchild who is studying software engineering at a university.
Right.
The cognitive, cultural, and technological gap between generations living under the exact same roof must be profound.
Oh, it creates a highly unique sociological environment. You're essentially compressing a century's worth of educational evolution into a single family tree.
That's a great way to put it. A century of evolution in one household.
But from a macroeconomic perspective, this disparity represents a massive talent dividend waiting to explode. The structural capacity of the workforce is transforming rapidly.
From manual labor to knowledge work.
Exactly. The economy of the 1990s relied on the sheer volume of labor. Millions of workers with basic literacy performing manual, low-skill manufacturing tasks.
Right.
But the economy of the 2020s and beyond, that demands high-skill, knowledge-based capabilities to drive technological innovation and complex services.
But absorbing that talent dividend isn't automatic, is it?
Not at all. It's actually a huge risk.
If you suddenly have millions of young people graduating with 15 and a half years of education, you can't just put them back into the same assembly lines their parents worked on.
No, they won't accept those jobs.
Exactly. The economy has to evolve fast enough to create jobs that actually require that level of education. Otherwise, you just end up with massive youth unemployment and widespread frustration.
That is the precise friction point many rapidly developing economies face. The educational infrastructure has successfully produced a highly skilled generation, but the labor market must structurally pivot to absorb them.
And pivoting a labor market of that size
Requires immense capital. You cannot build a high-tech service economy, nor can you fund the sprawling university systems and the complex urban research hospitals we discussed earlier without an enormous influx of wealth.
which perfectly transitions us to the third engine of the HDI.
The income engine.
Right. We've established that they built the hospitals and the schools, but structurally, you can't pour that much concrete or train that many doctors and teachers without massive, massive capital. Where did the money actually come from?
The UN tracks this using gross national income, or GNI, per capita. And to ensure the data is comparable across decades, it's measured in 2021 purchasing power parity dollars.
PPP, so adjusting for local costs.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This means we are accounting for inflation and the actual cost of living, giving us a true measure of purchasing power over time.
Okay, so hit me with the numbers.
In 1990, the GNI per capita was $1,647
Annually.
annually. By 2023, it had skyrocketed to $22,029.
So a 13-fold increase in wealth in just 33 years?
13-fold, yes.
If you're looking at that 13-fold increase, your first thought is probably, great, everyone got rich. But what does a shift from 1,600 to 22,000 actually look like on the ground? It's not just people getting a massive raise at the exact same job, right?
Far from it.
Mm-mm.
An economy operating at $1,647 per capita is fundamentally agrarian. It's supplemented by early-stage, labor-intensive manufacturing.
Sweatshops, basically.
Essentially, yes. The majority of the population is engaged in subsistence farming or very low-wage factory work.
Right.
A shift to $22,029 represents a total structural overhaul of the entire nation. It signifies the transition to becoming the factory of the world in the 2000s, followed by a rapid climb up the value chain.
Into tech and services.
Right. Into advanced manufacturing, robust domestic consumption, and a burgeoning service sector. This 13-fold increase is the ultimate catalyst.
It's the fuel.
It is the fuel that funded the public health initiatives that added a decade of life, and the educational infrastructure that doubled the years of schooling.
It's the financial engine driving the entire HDI leap. But we have to look past the macro average here.
Always, averages lie.
Because a 13-fold average increase is spectacular on paper, and it undeniably pulls hundreds of millions of people above the absolute poverty line. But does everyone feel it equally?
That's the billion-dollar question.
Right. If we peel back that shiny, unified HDI sticker of 0.797, we find a much more complicated, fractured reality beneath it. Let's talk about the cost of inequality.
To visualize this, I want you to imagine a classic unbalanced scale. On one side, we place the standard HDI we've been discussing, 0.797.
The shiny number?
Right. On the other side of the scale, we place the IHDI, the Inequality-Adjusted Human Development Index.
Okay, and what does that measure?
This metric takes the base HDI and systematically discounts it based on how unevenly health, education, and income are distributed across the population.
Like a penalty score.
Exactly. For China in 2023, the IHDI sits at 0.670.
Wow. The scale tips heavily. You drop from 0.797 all the way down to 0.670 just by factoring in inequality. That is a massive haircut to the nation's overall development score.
It creates what the UN formally calls a loss rate. Now, the data does show that this loss rate has improved over the last decade.
Okay, so it's getting better.
It is. It decreased from a 17.7% loss due to inequality in 2013 down to a 15.9% loss in 2023.
But still...
Exactly. But even with that steady improvement, inequality still effectively erases nearly 1/6 of the country's total human development achievements.
Nearly a sixth of their potential progress is just lost to the friction of uneven distribution.
That's rough. But where exactly does that inequality live? It's not just a blanket issue across all three engines, is it?
Not at all. What is critical to analyze here is how the UN data breaks down that inequality across those three specific dimensions we talked about.
Health, knowledge, income.
The inequality in life expectancy is actually relatively low, around 5%.
That makes sense. Biology is a great equalizer.
The inequality in education is higher, sitting around 10%.
Okay.
But the inequality in income, that is over 30%. Over 30% inequality in income? That completely reframes the narrative of that 13-fold wealth increase.
It really does.
Because the wealth is undeniably there, but it's heavily, heavily concentrated. You have billionaires and thriving middle classes in global financial hubs on the coast, but then you have rural populations inland still grappling with agricultural transitions.
A tale of two economies.
And it makes logical sense when you compare it to the health inequality. Like you said, biology places a hard limit on how long the billionaire can live compared to the farmer, hence the low 5% health inequality. But mathematically, there is absolutely no limit to how much more capital the billionaire can accumulate.
Precisely. The sky is the limit for income. And this extreme variance in income distribution creates localized, persistent pockets of severe vulnerability.
Which brings us to a crucial data set.
Right, from the UN's 2014 Survey on Multidimensional Poverty, or the MPI. Because poverty, as measured by modern developmental economics, is not merely the absence of financial capital.
Right. Poverty isn't just looking at a bank account saying, do you have money? It's a lived experience. It's what you lack on a daily basis.
The MPI looks at poverty through the lens of overlapping deprivations.
Overlapping? Like how?
It asks questions like, are you deprived of adequate nutrition? Do you lack access to clean cooking fuel? Is a child in your household failing to attend school?
Real, tangible deficits.
In 2014, the total poverty head count, which is the percentage of the population actually classified as multidimensionally poor, was remarkably low, at around 3.9%.
See, on the surface, that sounds like a massive victory. Less than 4% of a billion-plus population in multidimensional poverty.
It is a profound victory in terms of sheer volume. But here is the critical insight hidden in the deeper data.
There's always a catch.
For that 3.9% who are trapped in poverty, the intensity of that poverty is brutal.
What do you mean by intensity?
The intensity score measures the average proportion of deprivations people in poverty experience simultaneously. And that score sits at 41.4%.
What does a 41.4% intensity actually mean for an individual on a daily basis? How does that translate from a percentage into a lived reality for you?
It means that if you were in that 3.9%, you weren't just missing one element of a stable life. you're likely suffering from simultaneous compounding crises.
Give me an example from the data.
The data shows that nutritional deprivation is the heaviest driver here, contributing to 34.9% of the overall poverty index.
Okay, so a lack of basic food security.
And then educational gaps, specifically years of schooling and school attendance, they combine to contribute over 22%.
Wow.
So multidimensional poverty here means you are undernourished. Because you are undernourished, your cognitive and physical development is stunted, meaning you struggle or drop out of school.
Which leads right back to income.
Because you lack education, you are entirely locked out of the modern high-skill labor market, further cementing your lack of income.
It's a doom loop.
Exactly. Once an individual falls into this specific demographic, they face compounding barriers that are incredibly difficult to escape without highly targeted, holistic social interventions.
It's like a gravitational pull. The fewer resources you have, the harder the system pulls you down. It really forces you to reconsider the whole rising tide lifts all boats narrative.
It certainly challenges it.
Because yes, the 13-fold wealth increase lifted almost all the boats, but the boats that were anchored to the bottom are now drowning under the pressure of these overlapping deprivations.
And that concept of structural advantage and disadvantage brings us to another fundamental layer of society that dictates who rises and who falls.
Gender dynamics.
Yes. As we move into the next section of the UN data, we're going to look how this massive 33-year developmental transition was experienced differently by men and women.
And looking at the data, this is actually a massive global bright spot. The numbers here are genuinely surprising, especially given the historical context of the region.
They are very striking.
Let's look at the Gender Development Index, the GDI. This index measures the gender gap in those exact same three HDI areas: health, knowledge, and income.
Right, and a score of 1.0 means perfect statistical parity between men and women.
Okay, so where did they start?
In 1990, China's GDI was 0.853.
Not terrible, but room for improvement.
But by 2023, it had reached 0.976.
0.976. That places them firmly in the global first tier for gender development momentum. They are incredibly close to closing the gap entirely across those three core dimensions.
They are. But even more striking is the Gender Inequality Index, the GII.
Which is different from the GDI. How?
This index looks at a different set of metrics: reproductive health, political empowerment, and the labor market. In 2023, China scored 0.132 on the GII.
Wait, I need to pause here because this is where the data completely subverts expectations. A score of 0.132 ranks China 42nd globally in gender inequality.
Yes, 42nd.
But their overall human development rank is 80th. So their overall rank is 80th, but their gender inequality rank is 42nd.
That is correct. If we connect this to the broader global landscape, China actually vastly outperforms its own developmental weight class.
That's wild.
When it comes to statistical gender equality and minimizing the disparities in reproductive health and empowerment, they are scoring better than many fully developed high-income nations that have much higher overall HDI scores.
So they're effectively punching way above their weight class on gender parity. How did they manage that? You don't just accidentally jump to rank 42 on the global stage while still transitioning your overall economy.
No, it takes deliberate policy.
There has to be a specific targeted mechanism driving that.
The primary mechanism driving this upward mobility is the foundation of parity itself: female education. If you look at the data for expected years of schooling broken down by gender, the trend is undeniable. For decades, the gap between male and female education was a significant drag on overall national development.
But they closed it.
Immense resources were directed toward equalizing educational access. And the defining milestone occurred quite recently. As of 2021, female expected years of schooling reached 15.95 years.
Wow.
Which actually surpassed male expected years of schooling, which sat at 15.06 years.
I really want to emphasize that for you listening.
Yeah.
Girls entering the school system today are statistically expected to receive almost a full year more education than boys.
It's a huge shift.
That educational leap is the primary engine pulling that global GII rank all the way up to 42. It just proves the old developmental economics adage: you educate the women, you empower the society.
It is widely considered the single most effective intervention a developing nation can make.
Yeah.
Increased female education correlates strongly with lower infant mortality, higher household income, and greater political participation.
It's a win all around.
However, analyzing this specific data set brings us to one of the most complex paradoxes in the entire 33-year report.
Oh, here we go.
It is what we might categorize as the empowerment paradox.
Because the data takes a very weird turn here. We look at female political representation, and it aligns perfectly with the education data. The share of parliamentary seats held by women has risen steadily over the decades.
Moving from around 21% up to 26.5%.
So education is up and political power is up. But then you look at female labor force participation.
And the number goes in the exact opposite direction.
Wait, really?
Female labor force participation has dropped significantly. It fell from an incredibly high 73.0% down to 54.6%.
So female labor participation dropped down to 54.6%. That sounds like a massive regression in women's rights on paper.
It looks alarming, yes.
Women are more educated than men. They are holding more political power, but they are rapidly leaving the workforce. That defies standard economic logic. Usually, more education equals more workforce participation, not less. Are women being, pushed out of the economy?
It looks like a severe regression on the surface, but if we impartially analyze the exact structural mechanisms and age brackets of who is leaving the workforce, the narrative becomes much more nuanced.
Okay, unpack that for us.
This drop reflects the complex societal shifts that occur during rapid economic catch-up. There are several overlapping factors at play here, and it is not simply a matter of women being forced out of the labor market.
What's the first factor?
First, we have to consider the wealth effect. In the 1990s, when GNI per capita was under $2,000, households were largely operating in a survival economy.
Right.
They absolutely required dual incomes just to meet basic needs. Almost everyone had to work, particularly in agriculture or basic manufacturing.
Okay, so everybody worked because they had to.
As the society grew 13 times wealthier, a single income could suddenly support a household. This allowed families the option to return to more traditional divisions of labor by choice rather than necessity.
So survival economics forced women into the labor pool in the 90s, but newfound societal wealth gave them the financial luxury to opt out if they chose to.
That is one significant factor. But secondly, we must look at the transition of the state itself and the social safety net.
How does the state fit in?
In the earlier economic eras, the state provided robust, heavily subsidized childcare systems that were directly attached to state-owned enterprises.
Oh, right.
If you worked at a factory, the factory often had a nursery. This allowed mothers to work full-time without bearing the brunt of childcare costs.
Which is huge.
But as the economy transitioned over the decades to a more market-driven, privatized model, much of that state-sponsored childcare infrastructure was dismantled or scaled back.
Leaving families to figure it out.
The cost and burden of childcare shifted heavily back onto the nuclear family. When private childcare costs surge, it often mathematically makes more sense for one parent, historically the mother, to leave the workforce to provide that care.
That makes total sense from a household economics perspective. I mean, if childcare costs more than your entry-level salary, you just stay home.
Exactly.
But there has to be a third factor, too, tying back to that massive surge in expected years of schooling we just discussed, right?
It's exactly right. The simplest and perhaps most positive factor driving down the labor force participation rate is time spent in education.
Oh, because they're in school.
Yes. When female expected years of schooling jumps from 8 years to almost 16 years, you are taking tens of millions of young women, primarily aged 15 to 22, out of the labor force statistics and putting them into high schools and universities.
That perfectly explains it.
They aren't dropping out of society. They are purposefully delaying their entry into the labor market to build human capital. They are trading immediate low-wage labor for future high-wage potential.
So a dropping labor participation rate isn't necessarily a failure of empowerment. It might actually be a symptom of women having the luxury of higher education and increased household wealth.
Correct.
It's not a black and white statistic.
Far from it. It is a highly nuanced reflection of a society transitioning from an agrarian survival economy to a complex modern market economy.
So the initial high rates were just desperation.
The initial high participation rates were driven by necessity. The current lower rates are driven by a complex mix of educational delay, shifting childcare burdens, and the financial freedom of a growing middle class.
Wow.
But as we move into the final phase of our deep dive into this UN report, we must address the ultimate overarching cost of this entire 33-year transition.
Right.
We've talked about the financial cost and the inequality cost. Now, we must look at the planetary toll.
This is the bill coming due. Because you don't grow a nation's wealth by 13 times, build thousands of hospitals, pour enough concrete to connect 1 billion people, and completely reconstruct an economy without burning something.
You certainly don't. And the UN recently introduced a new metric to measure this exact toll, the Planetary Pressures Adjusted HDI, or the PHDI.
The PHDI, okay.
It is designed to hold nations accountable for the ecological debt they accrue while chasing economic and social development.
So it takes that highly impressive 0.797 human development score, looks at all the hospitals and universities, and asks, okay, but what did you do to the Earth to achieve this?
Exactly. And when you adjust China's score for its environmental impact, the number plummets severely.
How far?
The PHDI sits at 0.644. Adjusting for planetary pressures causes a staggering 19.2% drop from the base HDI.
19.2%.
Furthermore, this environmental penalty sends the nation plummeting 27 places down the global rankings.
A 19.2% drop, that is a massive penalty. It essentially means that nearly a fifth of their human development was effectively borrowed from the environment.
Borrowed from the future, really.
Right. They didn't just generate wealth, they extracted it from the ecological future. And when we look at the specific environmental data driving that penalty, it's honestly shocking.
The two primary metrics driving the PHDI lower are carbon emissions and material extraction. Let's look at the carbon footprint per capita first. In 1990, it was 2.15 tons per person. By 2023, it surged nearly threefold, hitting an all-time high of 8.35 tons per person.
Over 8 tons per person.
The industrialization required to lift millions out of poverty relied heavily on carbon-intensive energy grids, mostly coal.
And it's not just invisible carbon in the air, it's the physical, tangible stuff they're pulling out of the ground to build the infrastructure. The material footprint data is even more extreme.
The material footprint per capita measures the total amount of raw materials, biomass, fossil fuels, metal ores, and non-metal minerals that are extracted globally to meet the final consumption demands of the country.
Okay, so in 1990, where was it?
In 1990, the material footprint was 5.25 tons per person. By 2023, that number had exploded to 24.91 tons per person.
24.91 tons.
That is a 3.7 times increase in physical resource extraction.
Wait, 25 tons of what exactly? Like, what does that look like?
It is the aggregate weight of the cement required for megacities and high-speed rail networks, the steel for manufacturing, the rare earth minerals for technology,
Oh, I see.
the coal for power plants, and the biomass for an increasingly resource-intensive food supply chain.
To put that in perspective for you, 24.91 tons is roughly the weight of a fully loaded commercial dump truck.
That's a great visual.
That is the amount of physical earth being extracted, processed, and consumed for every single person every single year. It feels like someone got an incredible, high-paying job, bought the nice house, got the great health care, sent their kids to private school, but they financed their entire new lifestyle with high-interest credit cards.
Yes.
And now the ecological bill is finally arriving in the mail, and the interest rates are compounding.
That is a highly accurate structural analogy. This extreme resource dependency is the defining feature of China's rapid catch-up growth. It was the necessary mechanism to build the infrastructure quickly.
But it's dangerous now.
However, it is also currently their greatest vulnerability. The environmental cost is the heaviest tax currently levied on their development.
Yeah.
You simply cannot sustain a 19.2% planetary penalty indefinitely without the ecological systems that support human health, agriculture, and economic stability beginning to fail.
Which would literally drag the base HDI right back down.
Exactly. It's a closed loop.
If the environment collapses, agricultural yields drop, respiratory diseases surge, and health collapses. If health collapses, the income engine stalls. The entire system is interlinked.
Precisely. Which brings us to the ultimate conclusion of this 33-year data set. Let's visualize a tripod.
Okay, tripod.
This tripod represents the future of high-quality human development, not just for China, but globally. To stand stable, it needs 3 strong, equal legs.
What's the first leg?
The first leg is inclusivity, measured by closing the gap in the inequality-adjusted HDI. You cannot leave the rural populations behind in multidimensional poverty.
Right, and the second?
The second leg is gender equality, maintaining the incredible momentum we see in the GII and ensuring the highly educated female workforce is effectively integrated into the future economy.
And the third leg?
The third and currently weakest leg is planetary sustainability, repairing the massive deficit in the PHDI by decoupling economic growth from sheer material extraction.
So, synthesizing everything we've looked at across these 33 years for you listening, China executed arguably the largest scale HDI leap in recorded human history.
Undeniably.
They fundamentally rewired the lived experience of over 1 billion people. They built the infrastructure to add 10 years of life. They transitioned their economy to multiply wealth by 13.
And achieved world-class gender development momentum.
Particularly by completely closing and even reversing the gender gap in education. But the path to the next tier, to truly reaching very high human development, is blocked.
It is.
It is blocked by internal inequality, acting as a 15.9% drag, and it is blocked by a massive, unsustainable environmental footprint, causing a 19.2% loss.
The fundamental logic of the next economic era is clear. The era of volume-oriented growth, just building more concrete, burning more coal, and extracting more materials to force the macroeconomic numbers up, is over.
It has to be over.
The future requires structure-oriented growth. They must figure out how to hold their high HDI steady while aggressively closing the inequality and environmental gaps beneath it. It requires a transition from brute force expansion to high-efficiency, sustainable optimization.
It's an unprecedented challenge. We've spent this deep dive tracking the sheer, breathtaking scale of a 33-year transition. We've seen the invisible architecture of a society completely rebuilt from the ground up, moving from agrarian survival to high-tech longevity.
It's a fascinating journey.
But as we look at those carbon charts and those 25-ton material footprints, it leaves you with a lingering, almost existential question that the data itself cannot fully answer.
And what is that question?
If China's next 30 years must focus on radically shrinking its ecological footprint while somehow maintaining the immense wealth required to keep its aging population healthy and its youth educated, does that require voluntarily slowing down the very economic engine that pulled hundreds of millions out of poverty? Can a society willingly choose to stop sprinting when sprinting is the only thing it has ever known?